Living by the lake had always been my dream. The gentle lapping of water against the shore, the chorus of frogs at dusk, and the wooden bridge connecting my land to the main road, it was a slice of heaven. The bridge wasn't just a practical necessity, it was a piece of history hand-built by my grandfather decades ago. It had weathered storms and seasons, a steadfast symbol of our family's legacy. Then came the HOA. I wasn't part of their jurisdiction. My property predated their reach and my land deed clearly marked me as independent. But that didn't stop Greg, the HOA president, from sticking his nose where it didn't belong. He'd shown up on my porch last spring, clipboard in hand and a smarmy grin plastered across his face. "Afternoon, Mr. Rivers," he'd said, his tone dripping with forced politeness. "I'm here to discuss your bridge. It's come to our attention that it's not up to code." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. Up to whose code? Greg's grin faltered for a split second before recovering. "Well, the HOA has standards for structures that could impact the community's safety. We've received concerns." "From who?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He cleared his throat. "That's not important. What matters is that this bridge poses a potential hazard. We're going to need you to bring it into compliance." "Greg," I said, resisting the urge to laugh, "you don't have jurisdiction here. My land isn't part of your HOA. And this bridge has been standing longer than your subdivision's been around." His smile tightened. "Be that as it may, we're prepared to take action if necessary. Safety is our top priority." I didn't bother responding. I simply shut the door in his face. A few weeks passed without incident. Then came the letter, an official-looking notice demanding I upgrade or remove the bridge within 30 days. I ignored it. The bridge was solid, and I wasn't about to let some self-important HOA bully me into unnecessary repairs. Then, on a bright Tuesday morning, I heard the sound of heavy machinery. By the time I reached the lakefront, it was already too late. The bridge was gone. All that remained were splintered beams jutting out of the water like broken ribs. A backhoe sat idling on the bank, its operator, a burly man in a reflective vest, packing up his gear. Standing next to him, clipboard in hand, was Greg. "What the hell is this?" I shouted, storming up to him. Greg turned to me, feigning surprise. "Oh, Mr. Rivers. Good to see you. As you've been non-compliant with our safety mandates, we had no choice but to take action. For the good of the community, of course." I stared at him, dumbfounded. "You destroyed my bridge? My private property?" "We issued several notices," he said smugly. "Your failure to respond left us no alternative. You're welcome to rebuild it, to code, naturally." For a moment I couldn't speak. The audacity of it all left me reeling. Then I took a deep breath, my initial shock giving way to cold, simmering anger. "This isn't over, Greg," I said, my voice low and steady. "You've messed with the wrong person." He shrugged, clearly unconcerned. "I'll leave you to it then." As he walked away, I stood by the water's edge, staring at the remains of the bridge. It wasn't just about the inconvenience. This was personal. Greg had crossed a line, and he was about to learn that I don't back down. The destruction of my bridge wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a declaration of war. Without it, I had to navigate a dirt path around the lake just to get to town /U 2014A path that turned into a muddy quagmire after every rain. Greg and his HOA buddies probably thought I'd roll over and rebuild the bridge on their terms. They didn't know me very well. While the dust settled /U 2014, and by dust, I mean the splinters of my bridge still floating in the lake /U 2014, I started digging. Literally. I spent a few grueling days clearing debris from the water while stewing over Greg's smug face. Then I dug figuratively, poring over old property records and any HOA documents I could get my hands on. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that I hit the jackpot. Buried in an archive of scanned HOA meeting minutes /U 2014, thank you, nosy neighbors who love transparency /U 2014, was a lease agreement. It detailed how the HOA had secured exclusive lakefront access for their members years ago. What caught my eye wasn't the lease itself but the clauses tucked away in fine print. The lease was contingent on several conditions, including a percentage of profits from HOA events being paid as rent to the landowner /U 2026 me. The amount? A laughably low figure that hadn't been adjusted since the lease was signed. Even better, there was a renegotiation clause buried near the end. Any material changes to the property gave the landowner the right to adjust terms. And wouldn't you know it, demolishing my bridge counted as a material change. For a moment I just sat there, staring at the screen and letting the revelation sink in. Greg, in all his HOA glory, had handed me the perfect weapon. The next day, I called up a local attorney /U 2014 a sharp-witted woman named Elena who shared my disdain for overreaching HOAs. Over coffee at her office, I laid out everything I'd found. "You're telling me," she said, flipping through the lease, "they've been using your lakefront for years and paying you peanuts for it? And now they've destroyed part of the property?" I nodded. "Think we can make them regret it?" Elena grinned. "Oh, we're going to make them pay. Literally." We spent the next week crafting an airtight case to invoke the renegotiation clause. Elena pointed out that the clause didn't just allow for a new rental rate /U 2014, it allowed for additional fees for maintenance, infrastructure, and any improvements needed to restore the property. By the time we were done, I had a new lease proposal ready to go. The rent increase wasn't just substantial, it was astronomical. I wasn't playing nice anymore. The chapter ended with me standing on the lake's edge, holding the new lease in one hand and the old one in the other. The tide was turning and Greg had no idea what was coming. The day of reckoning arrived quicker than even I had anticipated. Elena had done a spectacular job drafting the revised lease agreement, and every clause was a masterpiece of legal precision. The HOA /U 2019's exclusive lakefront access was now attached to terms so detailed that even their most diligent accountant would need a month to decipher it all. First, there was the new rental rate /U 2014 a tenfold increase from their current laughably low fee. Then came the usage fees, hourly charges for lake access, event permits, and even a conservation fee to compensate for the environmental impact of their activities. Every penny would go directly into my pocket, legally justified and bulletproof. But the piece de resistance was the penalty clause. For every month the HOA failed to comply with the new terms, an additional 5% surcharge would be added to their rent. Armed with this ironclad agreement, I decided to deliver it in person. And what better venue than the next HOA board meeting? The meeting was held in their community center, a sterile building with beige walls and fluorescent lights /U 2014, the perfect setting for bureaucratic misery. I walked in wearing my best "don't mess with me" outfit, boots, jeans, and a leather jacket. The room went quiet as I made my way to the front, a manila folder tucked under my arm. Greg was there, of course, seated at the head of the table. His smug expression faltered when he saw me. "Mr. Rivers," he began, "this is a private meeting." "Not when it involves my property," I interrupted, slapping the folder onto the table. "Let's talk about your lakefront lease." Greg's face turned a lovely shade of red as I pulled out the new agreement and started reading aloud. I took my time, savoring every clause and watching the realization dawn on the board members' faces. When I finished, the room erupted into chaos. Board members whispered furiously to each other and Greg sputtered, "This is outrageous. You can't just." "Oh, but I can," I said, holding up a copy of the original lease. "Remember this? You agreed to these terms. And by destroying my bridge, you triggered the renegotiation clause. This isn't outrageous, Greg. It's business." The board spent the next hour trying to argue, negotiate, and plead. But Elena had anticipated every possible rebuttal, and I had answers for all of them. By the end of the meeting, Greg was visibly sweating, and the treasurer looked like she might faint. As I walked out, I couldn't resist throwing one last line over my shoulder. "You've got 30 days to sign. After that, the penalties kick in. Have a nice day." Over the next few weeks, the HOA scrambled to figure out how to cover the new rent. Rumors spread through the community about emergency meetings and frantic attempts to raise funds. Greg avoided me entirely, which was just fine /U 2014, I wasn't done with him yet. The chapter ended with me sitting on my porch, sipping sweet tea and watching the sun set over the lake. The tables had turned, and for the first time in months, I felt truly at peace. The HOA was learning the hard way that messing with me wasn't just a bad idea, it was a costly one. The HOA's downfall began as a slow trickle and turned into a flood. The increased rent and fees hit their coffers hard. Emergency meetings became a weekly occurrence, each one more frantic than the last. Residents started asking questions. Why was the HOA bleeding money? Why were their lakefront events suddenly so expensive? And, most damningly, why had Greg gotten the HOA entangled in this mess in the first place? Meanwhile, my bank account was flourishing. With every overdue payment, the penalties piled up and the checks kept rolling in. I didn't waste a moment, I poured the money straight into rebuilding the bridge. This time I didn't just restore it, I upgraded it. The new bridge was a masterpiece, designed by a local craftsman who shared my love for preserving the area's rustic charm. It was wider, sturdier, and equipped with solar-powered lanterns that lit up the path at night. I added a small bench halfway across, perfect for sitting and enjoying the view. But I didn't stop there. With Elena's help, I worked out the legalities to open up a section of the lakefront to the broader community. I'd grown tired of the HOA treating the lake as their private playground, so I turned it into something better, a public space. Families could now fish, picnic and kayak without needing an HOA permit or paying exorbitant fees. The community loved it. Greg not so much. The final nail in his coffin came when residents uncovered discrepancies in the HOA's financial records. Under pressure from mounting debts and outraged members, Greg had started cutting corners, unreported fees here, a missing payment there. Word spread quickly, and soon enough, an emergency vote was called to remove him from his position. I didn't attend the meeting where Greg was ousted, but I heard it was brutal. He stepped down in disgrace, his reputation shattered. By the time he sold his house and moved out, most of the neighborhood wanted nothing to do with him. As for me, life returned to its peaceful rhythm. On weekends, I'd watch families enjoying the lake from my porch. Kids splashed in the shallows, couples strolled along the new bridge, and locals gathered for potlucks on the grassy banks. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the lake in hues of gold, Elena stopped by. She leaned against the porch railing, surveying the scene with a satisfied smile. "You know," she said, "you didn't just win. You turned this whole mess into something good." I nodded, sipping my sweet tea. "Poetic justice, don't you think?" She laughed. "Greg thought he could push you around. Now he's gone and you've got a thriving community space. Not bad for a guy who just wanted to be left alone." As the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of contentment. The bridge was rebuilt, the lakefront was alive with joy, and the HOA had learned an expensive lesson about messing with the wrong person. In the end, justice wasn't just served, it was shared. And that, I decided, was worth every splintered beam.